Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty intense. We're looking at how military divisions plan for fire support.
And it's so much more than just pointing artillery and shooting.
Right. This is about orchestrating one of the most complex functions on a battlefield. We're diving into the framework that's built to, defeat chaos. The system that decides what weapon hits what target, when, and why.
And it all has to be perfectly synchronized with troops on the ground.
Yeah.
If you want a window into high-level military planning, this is really it.
So let's start with the basics. What are we even talking about when we say fires?
Good place to start. Fires is the use of any weapon system. It could be lethal, it could be non-lethal. The point is to create a very specific desired effect on a target.
And we're narrowing that down even further to fire support.
Exactly. Fire support is when those fires directly support the forces on the ground, land, maritime, special ops, you name it. The fires are completely tied to their objectives, to their maneuver.
And the framework we're going to follow is the Military Decisionmaking Process, the MDMP. Our goal here is to see how the fire support coordinator, the FSCOORD, and their team integrate into this whole thing.
It's all about that synchronization. The process starts, and the clock is already ticking. Step 1, receipt of mission. The pressure is on from the very first second.
So the mission just landed. How does the fire cell even begin to get ahead of the curve? What's the immediate focus?
They immediately start updating what they call their running estimate.
A running estimate.
Yeah, and that term is critical. They're constantly assessing the situation, not just reacting. They're looking at what they have, what the enemy's doing, and asking, is our plan still working?
And I guess, more importantly, can we even support what's planned for tomorrow?
That's it exactly. It's an anticipatory document. And that thinking allows them to give that first critical piece of input for the initial warning order that goes out to the whole force.
Okay, so once that initial heads up is out, they dig in for the heavy lifting. That's step 2, mission analysis.
Right. And this is where they work very, very closely with the intelligence folks, the G2, on what's called the intelligence preparation of the battlefield, or IPB.
Which makes sense. You can't plan to shoot at things if you don't know where they are. What is the FSCOORD actually producing at this stage?
Well, they're translating the big picture orders into specific tasks for fire support, and they're also taking a hard look at their own tools, their artillery, their rockets, and basically telling the planning staff, here's what we can do, here's what we can't do, and here's where we're vulnerable.
And this is where we get to what you called the intellectual breakthrough of the process, developing the draft fire support tasks.
Yes, and this isn't just a wish list of targets. It's a very specific, structured statement.
Why so structured?
Because the structure forces you to think beyond just, the explosion. It's brilliant, really. Every task has to include the task, purpose, and effect.
ETPE.
Task, purpose, effect.
It solves the problem of miscommunication. It makes the planner focus on the result you want to achieve on the enemy, not just the physical act of shooting. I really like that focus on the why. The source material gives a couple of great examples. Let's talk about the first one, using smoke to obscure a view.
Okay, so the task is disrupt enemy observation of breaching forces. Simple enough.
But the purpose is the key. It's why you're doing it. To allow our forces to breach an obstacle without getting shot at effectively.
And the effect is the pass-fail test. The enemy is unable to observe our forces until that breach is done. If they can still see us, it doesn't matter how much smoke you used, the mission failed.
So you can measure success.
You have to. Look at the second example, a river crossing, the task. Strike enemy forces along a specific route. The purpose, to delay them from interfering with the 51st Infantry Division.
And the effect is what you want to see happen because of that delay.
Right. The 51st Infantry Division gets across that river fast. Those TPE statements contain the entire tactical goal in just a few words.
And that deep understanding of the goal, of the end state, leads right into the commander's guidance.
Absolutely. The fires team has to internalize the commander's intent, the purpose, the key tasks, the end state, so they can make smart decisions on the fly when, the plan meets reality.
And the commander gives practical guidance to help with that. Things like priority of fires.
Yes, that's a huge one. It's
Right.
basically the standing order for who gets fire support first when multiple units are all screaming for it at the same time.
And what about for air assets?
That's the other big one, the CAS distribution decision. It's how the commander decides to divvy up close air support, those precious jets, among all the competing needs on the ground.
So you have guidance on priorities. How do you manage the actual space? How do you keep friendly forces from, firing on each other?
That's where fire support coordination measures, or FSCMs, come in. They're basically lines on a map. Some are permissive, some are restrictive. They create clarity and deconflict everything that's going on.
But isn't there a risk that restrictive measures could slow you down if the enemy does something unexpected?
That's the constant tension. You're always balancing control with speed, so you try to make the measures as permissive as possible. For instance, you might place a coordinated fire line, a CFL, really close to your own troops.
And that does what?
It allows your deep fires, like jets doing air interdiction, to hit targets beyond that line without having to call and get permission for every single strike.
Sure.
It's pre-approval for a certain area. It builds in speed while keeping people safe.
So once those tasks and control measures are drafted, we hit step 3, course of action development. The staff creates multiple options, multiple COAs.
And for every single one of those options, the FSTOR has to develop a complete scheme of fires.
The blueprint.
It's the whole blueprint. It explains how the commander is going to integrate all fires, artillery, air power, electronic warfare, everything to get the mission done. And it has to be completely tied to the scheme of maneuver.
So what the infantry is doing directly dictates the fire plan.
100%. And the first priority always goes to supporting the decisive operation, the main effort.
Now, when they plan the individual shots, they use these mnemonics, TTLOBC and PICLOTCR.
They sound like jargon, but they're just incredibly useful checklists to make sure nothing gets missed.
Let's break down TTLODC.
Sure, it stands for Target, Trigger, Location, Observer, Delivery System, Attack Guidance, and Communications.
So let's make that real. The target is an enemy tank. The delivery system is a rocket launcher. What does the trigger look like?
The trigger could be an event. For example, when the lead tank crosses this specific bridge, the location has to be a precise grid coordinate, and you have to know who the observer is and how you're going to talk to them on the radio.
So no detail is too small.
No detail can be missed. A mistake in communications could mean a delay of minutes, and on the modern battlefield, minutes can mean mission failure.
This is where it gets really mathematical, doesn't it? Especially with something called engagement area development.
Oh, absolutely. An engagement area is basically a trap. You want to lure the enemy in and then destroy them with massed, overwhelming fires.
But what if the enemy is moving? You can't just shoot where they are right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is where trigger development becomes critical. You have to calculate where they will be when your rounds land.
Wait, so you're really trying to predict the future with physics?
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
You have to calculate the total mission time. That's the time it takes to process the fire request, plus the actual time of flight for the rocket or the shell.
And then
Then you multiply that total time by the enemy's estimated speed. The distance you get is where you place the trigger point on the map, get it right, and the shell lands right on top of them.
that's an incredible level of coordination for just ground assets. It must get even more complicated when you add in air support.
It does, and you have to, because a division's area of operations is huge. You need air power. But the fire cell has to be very clear about the two different types of air operations they're planning for.
Yeah.
First is air interdiction, or AI. Think of these as deep strikes. They're hitting targets so far from your own troops that you don't need detailed moment-by-moment integration. The goal is to disrupt the enemy before they can even get to the fight.
And the second type must be the opposite.
It is. That's close air support, or CAS. This is air action against targets that are, like the name says, in close proximity to friendly forces. And it absolutely requires detailed integration with the troops on the ground to avoid fratricide.
And you have different levels of readiness for these planes, right?
You do. For both AI and CAS, you can have assets on ground alert where they have to scramble and take off, or you can have them on airborne alert,
Already flying.
already in the air, which is obviously much faster. For CAS, the most responsive option is airborne alert CAS or XCAS. Those jets are already circling in a designated zone, just waiting for the call.
So how does a ground commander make sure they get one of those jets when they need it?
That's the key. They have to compete for it. The ground commander has to articulate their request so clearly during the MDMP, with a solid rationale and a synchronized plan, that the Joint Force Air Component Commander sees it as a top priority. A sloppy request will lose out every time.
Okay, so the staff develops a few plans, a few COAs, then comes step 4, war gaming. They're testing the plans.
Yes, this is crucial. This is not where you create the plan. This is where you try to break it. You test its feasibility and strength against what you think the enemy will do.
And they set up the rules before they start playing.
They have to. They establish evaluation criteria beforehand to measure how good the fire support plan is for each COA. Things like Is it timely? What's the risk? For CAS, they'll grade it on timeliness, accuracy, flexibility, and whether it creates the desired effects.
And the main tool they use to track all this during the war game.
It's called the Fire Support Execution Matrix. You can think of it as the master script for the battle. It's a table that connects every unit to a target, a location, a trigger, and an effect, all laid out across the different phases of the operation. It's synchronization on paper.
And that synchronization leads to assessment. How do they know if the plan actually worked in the real world?
Well, this is where they have to be really honest with themselves. They use two different types of measurement, a measure of performance, or MOP, and a measure of effectiveness, or MOE.
MOP versus MOE.
A MOP answers the question, are we doing things right? It's about a friendly action. For example, did we successfully fire the smoke mission we were tasked with?
Okay, so a task-based metric.
Right. But the MOE asks the much harder, more important question. Are we doing the right things? It measures the result.
So even if the MOP says, yes, we fired the smoke, the MOE asks,
was the enemy actually unable to see our breaching force? Did we create the effect we wanted? If the answer is no, you have to immediately rethink your approach.
And this whole detailed process has to work for different kinds of missions, right? Not just big attacks.
Oh, completely. For offensive tasks, you need fires that are incredibly responsive and flexible to maintain surprise and speed. You often rely more on air assets because the fight is moving so fast.
And for defensive tasks?
In a defense, control often becomes more centralized. The division artillery commander might hold on to control of most assets.
Why centralize?
For flexibility.
Yeah.
A central command post can mask the effects of every single gun and rocket launcher at a critical point instantly. It's about leveraging every asset to win the decisive fight, wherever it happens.
Then we should probably touch on the non-traditional roles, like supporting civil authorities.
Yes, DSCA. Field artillery units rarely fire their cannons in those situations, obviously, but their skills are still incredibly valuable. They're experts in mission command, in observation, in running convoys, and in liaison work. All of that is critical when you're supporting, say, hurricane relief. And their ability to do precision fires is actually a key tool in stability operations, where avoiding collateral damage is everything.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for someone listening? The MDMP, this whole fire support plan, it sounds incredibly complex, almost bureaucratic.
It is, but it has to be. It's a structure designed to manage pure chaos. It integrates every single asset into a precise timeline to minimize risk to everyone.
So the success of it all really comes down to two things.
I think so. First is that incredibly detailed anticipatory planning we've been talking about. And second is institutional flexibility. The FSCOORD have to be able to advise the commander on how to achieve their goals, even when the plan goes completely off the rails.
We've seen how precision is used to reduce collateral damage, but as you think about the future, with all the complexity of synchronizing targets across the air and ground, here's something to mull over. How might the challenge of unintended consequences change when new technology introduces faster, autonomous, or even swarm-based weapons into this already intricate MDMP framework?
That is a fascinating and, frankly, a terrifying question.
We'll leave you with that thought.